liberty, given that something like Magna Carta actually gave two rights. One, of course, was the due process of law right, which is very important. And the second was the right to enter into contracts without royal approval, very good for a nation of shopkeepers. But it was the first one, the due process one, which in our context was tremendously important. But that was quite a parochial affair for a long time. I mean, elsewhere in Europe, certainly in France, people could be banged up just on the rescript of the king.
But it has a consequence, doesn't it? Because you say the Enlightenment produced these two wonderful, extraordinary revolutions, the American Revolution and the French Revolution. Each of them said, we believe that these are the fundamental rights, liberty and life and property. But in one, it took off, it became really the germ, if you like, that laid the foundations for the American society as we see it now. And in France it imploded and gave rise to tyranny. Is liberty the same wherever it happens, or is it important that there's a constitutional and legal framework which allows liberty to operate?
Well, the answer is a bit like Tolstoy's point of view on happy and unhappy marriages. the idea of liberty for the individual tends to be the same, and is indeed the same when you compare the Bill of Rights that the Americans came to a bit after drafting their constitution and the Declaration of the Rights of Man in France. They're very, very similar documents. Many of the sentiments are common to both, for the very good reason that they were drafted by rather the same people and quoted extensively Locke also. But they went wrong in different ways because of historical circumstances. The new republic in North America was very small, not very populous, it had relatively little history. You may want to say, I mean, unlike France, which was laden with problems of sociological and economic and political kind, that it was very, very difficult for people to worm their way out of. There was a famous night when the National Assembly repealed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of France's laws, because there was such a sort of spaghetti junction of conflicting laws, some of them very, very ancient, giving privileges and enacting prohibitions. And they found the task of reorganizing their polity, reorganizing the very structure of the state, almost insuperable, and needed the strong hand of a near dictator in the form of Napoleon later to make it happen, to rewrite on the basis of Roman law a whole new code of laws. Whereas in the American setting, they had a much freer hand in a way to reinvent themselves, which is a point that I discuss in the book.
You will see that I am moving towards institutions which support liberty. And it seems to me you were simply saying it's something that happens in your mind. It is perfectly clear to me that what happens in the American Revolution is that they've had 250 years of English common law, which has taught them the uses of a law-abiding society, and one which has representation as well. And so the Enlightenment values which you ascribe to the American Revolution actually come out of the English common law. And I think philosophically, I really feel it is very important when we're talking about civil liberties, that we don't just think in a misty way of freedom, but we think of the actual institutions which make freedom work. And arising from that, I'd like to ask you that clearly this is happening in Western Europe and North America, but why is it only happen? Why did it only happen in Western Europe? Were there particular institutions in Western Europe that allowed freedom, these ideas of individual liberty, to break out?
Well, there are two very interesting questions there. The first one, on institutions, I agree with you, that in the end it's institutional arrangements that best embody and preserve civil liberties, no question about that. And I agree with you also that there are certain traditions of law, but not only English common law, because traditions of Roman law have proved themselves pretty successful in some, at any rate, of the democracies of Europe more recently. But in the case of common law, when the Levellers, when the New Model Army people were saying, when Adam, Doug and Eve span, who was then the gentleman, calling into question the kind of structure which oppressed them very much, despite several centuries of English common law. What they were looking for was a rearrangement of institutions that would better embody and express the principles of that law. That's what the Americans did, I think. I mean, the thing that's so exciting when you look back at the Federalist Papers and the debates that the Constitution makers had in America again something I discuss in the book. It's a really amazing moment in history. What they did was they found ways of constructing organs of government and of law, of the judiciary, which would, given certain other ceteris paribus clause applying, work tremendously well at allowing those the sort of principles that we respect, like habeas corpus and the protection of life and liberty, and the individual's right to pursue happiness, meaning by happiness in the 18th century context something much richer than we mean. You know, we mean something that would be completely well satisfied if we just put Prozac in the water supply. We have it piped into our television sets now every day. But they had this idea of, you know, this more Aristotelian notion of something called the rich and good, which was the result of the endeavour of the individual freely undertaken. And that's very admirable. But you can have English common law, as we had it in the 17th century, and for it not to do what the mass of people required of it. So that's the first question. The second one, I think that the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, which ended a century of wars of religion, in the course of the 16th and the first half of the 17th century, there was an endeavour by Catholicism and by Catholic powers to try to recover for Rome all those parts of Europe that had been lost to the Protestant causes. And it very often happens when something is dying, and we may be witnessing it again in our own day, you know, particularly a religion, when it begins to lose its grip and to be less influential, it fights back and it does a tremendous amount of harm.